Hello, and welcome to the Upper Pen podcast. My name is Dakota Van Linden, and today I'm talking with M.R. Carey about his novel, The Book of Koli. This novel is the first in a series called the Rampart Trilogy. In addition to The Book of Koli, the Trials of Koli are out as well. The audible books are read by Theo Solomon and Saffron Coomber. The Fall of Koli is out March 2021. Can you tell me a little bit about this series?
Yeah, certainly. So it's a post-apocalyptic story. It takes place several centuries in the future. The world we know has long ago ceased to exist. It's still vaguely remembered. There are a lot of things that brought down our global civilization. Some of them were to do with warfare. Some of them were to do with climate breakdown, and some of them, a lot of them, were to do with the disastrous interventions that we made at the last moment to try to forestall climate breakdown, the sort of geoengineering projects that you're starting to hear about now. So we tried all that stuff. We tried seeding the ocean with algal blooms and the sky with silver nitrate, and it all went horribly wrong. We also tried a lot of genetic engineering. So the young protagonist, Koli, lives in a world where there aren't very many people left. The whole of nature has kind of metastasized. Almost every species is ferociously hostile to human life. The animals, but also the plants. The plants have been, in order to stop deforestation, humankind experimented with the rapid growth of plants and with improving plants' ability to take on both mineral resources and to photosynthesize. And so what you have now are feral forests that actually sort of actively hunt for warm-blooded creatures to eat. So you have a few human enclaves that are still holding out, but they're scattered and they're sparse and they're very underpopulated, which means that there are now real problems with the gene pool. There are fewer live births every year. These are communities that are hanging on by their teeth. And one of the things that helps them to survive, or sort of makes the difference between life and death, is the few pieces of ancient technology that are still functioning because they had auto repair functions, and therefore even a few centuries on, they're able to repair themselves and power themselves. A lot of them are weapons, but not all. And in Koli's village, there are 4 of these precious pieces of tech, 3 weapons and a database as a sort of computer with a lot of the memory, the knowledge of the old times stored in it. When you reach 15, you try out with the tech. You face your testing, you pick up a piece of tech, and if it wakes for you and if it responds to you, then you become a rampart. You become one of the very few who can wield the tech to defend the village. Koli gets to 15 and he tries and he fails, and that leads him to a fateful decision, which will ultimately affect not only his future, but the future of everybody in his village and far beyond. That's a thumbnail.
That's a really great synopsis. um, so I really love that the plants are alive and they're pretty sentient, right? So they kind of find people and they eat them and they grow into these areas where people live.
I don't think they're sentient. I think these are all just tropisms. They're just
Okay.
automatic reflex things. They move towards light and they move towards heat. Unfortunately, that's been tweaked to the point where they can move towards body heat.
Okay.
So if you walk into the forest at a time when the trees are awake, then they will come towards you and they will find you and they will sort of eat you. They'll crush you down, and then everything that was in you, all of the sort of minerals in your body, will enrich their roots and be absorbed. And as we find later on in the series, it's not just that. It's not just the trees. The seeds, the choker seeds, are also deadly in a different way. Everything that lives hates us, Koli says, and it seems like that's not an exaggeration.
Were you just looking at a Venus flytrap and you're like, ooh, I have an idea?
I was actually reading articles about geoengineering. I was reading some environmentalists are now saying that basically we're past the point where just lowering our emissions is going to make the difference. That probably we're heading for 2 degrees plus of global warming, whatever we do, and therefore we need to make more aggressive interventions. And yeah, they're actually discussing turning the entire planet into a sort of laboratory and just testing out different things that might lower the carbon load in the atmosphere, locking it up in various ways. The trouble is, there's no rewind on that stuff. Once you start playing with ecosystems, once you start playing with the entire biosphere, then you kind of have to live with whatever happens. So I was sort of running with that idea, really. One of the many nightmares that plagues me at the moment.
I have similar nightmares about microtechnology and like the ones that they create to help like destroy cancer. I watched a documentary and had nightmares for weeks, and then I was like, oh God. I mean, it's all for good, but like, what happens?
Have you read Neil Stephenson's The Diamond Age?
No.
Because he explores a future where micro machines of various kinds are so ubiquitous that the entire atmosphere is kind of thick with them, and you have to breathe through a mask because there are trillions of these little machines.
That's so awesome and horrifying.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna have to go read it. So one of the things that I noticed right away when reading the Book of Koli is that you write with improper grammar. I imagine that this was to create like a distancing effect from Koli and us in the modern world. At least that's how it felt to me. Like it really helped distinguish that he was not really in our time. But was that difficult to do, to write improper grammar and kind of keep that language that he uses going throughout the book?
It was almost the very first thing that came, really. In a sense, the world of the story grew around Koli, and Koli grew around the voice. In fact, the voice even precedes the character. I wrote a short story called All That's Red Earth for an anthology by PS Publishing, Weird Winter Tales. And in that, I mean, that's a fantasy story set in a sort of medieval world with magic, but it has Koli's voice in it. The protagonist is called Tarry rather than Koli, and is actually more like the character Cup in the novel. But I loved the voice, and I thought, yeah, there's more to be done with that voice and that character. You're absolutely right. One of the key things I think it does is it draws a line between his world and ours. But I think the other thing about it is you come to learn later on that literacy has more or less disappeared from this world. Nobody knows how to read, and nobody knows what a book is. There's a point where Monono shows Koli a book, and he describes it as a physical object, but he has no concept of what its function might be. And something like that doesn't happen by accident. There are literally billions upon billions of books in the world. They don't just disappear. They have to be removed, and the people's access to the written word has to be deliberately removed. And we find out who did that and how that happened. That's kind of key to stuff that we see that takes place in the third book.
So that brings me up to another really good point is you have all of this technology that kind of resembles what we have now. A lot of it is something that it can like, oh, I see where you were going with that, but not right away. So it reminds me a lot of reading Mark Lawrence, who he had these like really strange things in his Red Queen trilogy. And it was like these characters carried around like this thing and they worshipped it, but it was a hand grenade. And they didn't know what its function was. So it reminds me a lot of this, like Koli had no idea what the music player was.
No.
And you do a really good job of not telling us what it is until its function is revealed for the story. Did you have people like read this and be like, oh, do you know what it is right away? Or did I hide it? Or
I did use my family a lot. My wife Lynn and our 3 kids as beta test readers on the story, especially for things like Monono's voice. When the music player wakes up and it has an artificial intelligence built into it. This is not a huge spoiler, and Koli sort of has to figure out who and what he's talking to. I did a lot of different versions of that and tried them out on my family, because I felt like, just as Koli's voice is sort of central to the way the story works, I think Monono's voice in a different way, both before and after the sort of the big change that she undergoes, is crucial to the way the story works. We kind of have to believe in her, and we have to respond to her. We have to like her, I think, for the story to work. So yeah, that was something that I sort of spent a lot of time thinking about. I don't. There's a lot of things I don't research. I just wing. But I did spend a lot of time on that.
I really love Monono. She's one of those really interesting characters, because she does come up to a change pretty quickly in the books, but I really love the relationship between her and Koli. There's just something about it that really, like, oh, I get it. I get why she'd be interested in him, and he's really interested in her.
Oh yes, he's got it bad for Monono, I think, which is sad, because she doesn't have a physical extension. She doesn't have a body. She's just a voice in a machine. But yeah, he's somehow managed to fall in love with her. And again, that's something that plays out, I hope, in unexpected ways over the three stories. But I guess, yeah, one of the things that the series is about is the way we interact with technology, the way technology defines us. Spinner says at one point, not in the first book, but in the second book, she says, I think that all the tools we pick us up and use us too. And there's a sense in which human evolution now has kind of moved away from our physical bodies. Our physical bodies don't change all that much. We evolve through our technology. We pick up and handle the world in different ways through our technology. And we've reached the point now where our technology may be talking back to us, may be on the threshold of having an agenda of its own.
That brings up a funny point. You at one point, Monono, after her change, she says, I could take over the world, but I don't want to.
Yeah.
It was very Skynet for me, and I was like, oh God, Monono, don't go evil.
And then there is a question, I think, as to what would a fully aware artificial consciousness want? What would its motivations be? What would its sense of itself be? And we're just beginning to scratch the surface of that in book one, and it becomes more central in books 2 and 3. So at the moment, Monono is only sort of looking out for Koli and helping him along with his journey, but she does have goals of her own, aspirations of her own, as we'll see.
The other thing that I wondered about when I listened to the audiobook, because I really like hearing people read me stories. I don't know what it is. I just really enjoy it.
Yeah, I do too.
Theo Solomon did a really good job, I thought.
He did, and Saffron in the second book is awesome too. They're both just perfect for those roles.
So one of the things that I noticed is Koli's surrounded by women of varying ages. And I was wondering if this was intentional. Like they all have these different goals in mind, but they're all women of different walks of life. Were they always these characters that were with him, or did you play around with different people coming in and out?
That's a good question. I think I was looking for, I mean, this is something that has become kind of almost like instinctive through writing screenplays. Colin McCarthy, who was the director on The Girl with All the Gifts, on the movie version of Girl with All the Gifts, said at one point when we were working on that project, he said, what you really need to ask yourself for all of the characters apart from the protagonist is, what aspects of the protagonist do they help you to bring out? You're looking for characters who will be foils for your main character. So I think Ursula, Monono, Cup, Katrin, Spinner, all in different ways help us to understand Koli better, which is not to say that that's their only role in the story at all, but that was kind of like the starting point in each case.
They also seem like very good guidance figures. Like, hey, Monono's always calling him an idiot or something.
Dopey boy.
Yeah, dopey boy. So I really liked how they guided him away from some of his adolescent boy ideas into there's real problems. Maybe we should look at them.
I mean, he is a bit of an idiot at first. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's very well meaning, but he's not always super smart. He jumps into things with the best of intentions, and then realizes that he's out of his depth. So yeah, he needs that guidance. But also, he is smart enough to know when he's onto a good thing, to know when when there is something that he needs to learn, and when someone can teach him. He's got no false pride. He just accepts what he's given. And I think if Ursula is a kind of mother figure
Yeah.
to him, Monono is a big sister. He needs all of that input, I think, to get to where he's going.
Yeah. I loved it. I loved all the characters so much.
That's great to hear. Thank you.
So the one of the other really cool things is you tease readers with information that Koli gets. So he'll in the beginning of the book when he meets Ursula, he gets information from Ursula, and then at the end of the chapter, Koli says something like, "Oh, I'll tell you that part when it makes more sense." And then I really love that technique of holding back in a I don't know, it's more than a literary device. It's like, hey, I know that this is important and it's going to drive you bonkers.
It's one of the benefits, I think, of having a relatively sort of naive or innocent protagonist. So that you're kind of discovering the world along with him, but also because he's an inept storyteller, he sometimes gets ahead of himself, which lets me tease stuff. He sometimes doesn't entirely understand what he's seeing, so you glimpse some things over his head. That's a fun way, I think, of opening up a world gradually in stages, which is something I did in Girl with All the Gifts as well.
Yeah.
Because Melanie is also an innocent in a different way than Koli.
One of the characters that is not an innocent is Sunless.
Yeah.
So what is it about the breakdown of technology that brings out these Messiah-like characters?
I think that it's just I think it's something that happens cyclically. I mean, and again, this was me sort of riffing on the present, although it's a story about the future. It's you look around you at the moment, we seem to be living through one of those ages, one of those moments of history when people turn their back on rationality and start sort of choosing something to believe in, however slender the sort of reasoning behind it is, however slender the arguments for it might be. I mean, my wife and I have just been reading a couple of articles about the QAnon conspiracy and how huge that's become over the last few years, based on nothing but a handful of tweets from a completely anonymous internet poster. And people are sort of like buying into that to the extent that it defines their political identities, that it kind of like puts them at odds with their families. Faith is a powerful force, but it's not always a force for good. So Sunless kind of embodies all of my fears and hang-ups about that. That I guess there's a sense in which religion is as important to the books as technology is. Just as the technology of the world that was lost kind of continues to cast its shadow over Koli's world and to define what's possible within Koli's world. There are these sort of echoes of faiths that have come from our time. The dead god is kind of like what's left of the Abrahamic religions. We have this new religion, the Dandrake, the followers of Dandrake, which is it dates to a time after our own, which we'll find out more about later, the time of the unfinished war, the time when things were really falling apart and people were clinging to whatever they had, whatever they could, that gave them hope.
I really think that that's Sunless's power more than anything. Like he gets people to believe things because he can read them really well, but he gives them something to believe in. I think
Yeah,
after they've been cast out of these small societies, and it seems like that's his real draw, is like, we can do something together.
he knows very well what handles to use to pick people up by. He knows how to as you say, to manipulate people's hopes and beliefs, and sort of put them in line with his own. In what he does to Cup, Cup is a young trans woman who's just about to go through puberty, the wrong puberty, a time of sort of like maximal stress and maximal sort of self-doubt. And he says to her, I'll give you an angelic body. I'll give you a body that's male and female both and better than either. So yeah, he's and he reads Koli very well. And he gets Koli doubting himself, and he gets Koli believing that he has supernatural powers. He's a very, very dangerous man.
I feel like there are a lot of very dangerous people. And it's all because they can talk. They can get you to talk to them, it feels like. So
yeah,
Sunless was very, very interesting character because of that. And then Ursula's viewpoint in the back of Koli's mind all the time.
Saying don't listen, don't listen to him, don't fall for it.
It's
I guess
just a line.
Sunless is the only sort of like fully evil character in the book. I think he's the only person who I think is unredeemable. Is just purely terrifying, purely malevolent. You get a lot of characters like Katrin, who are, maybe bad in some ways, but they're necessary evils, and you can see why she does the things she does. You could say that she's using her power tyrannically or unfairly, but in situations where she's got to make a difficult call.
I really love that Koli's indignant when he finds out the secret of his village, but I understand why, like, even in his mind, he goes through the reasons of why maybe they keep this secret hidden. And I really like that duality of, well, it's more than just power dynamics. It is that, but also it's more.
It's keeping a community together when it's on the edge of disintegrating.
Yeah.
Which is, it's a sort of ongoing project. I think, you look at the two sisters, you look at Katrin and Fer. Katrin is the one who has scruples. She'll do the difficult things, she'll do the cruel things sometimes, but she'll weigh the options, and she'll only do it if it's necessary. Fer is the one who has the sort of more autocratic tendencies and would be quite happy to sort of to run the village in a more despotic way, just telling everybody what to do and punishing them if they didn't do it. We're going to see myth and rule tested much more harshly in books 2 and 3. There are some crises coming for the village, which are going to shake up those power dynamics in some hopefully interesting ways.
I'm so excited. So something that is pretty apparent in the books that I've read of yours is that you like putting young people in particular in precarious situations. So the girl with all the gifts has young Melanie, the boy on the bridge has Steven, someone like me has Fran. Fran is my favorite. Oh my gosh, I loved her so much.
Thank you.
So what is it about seeing the world or difficult situations through the eyes of young people that draws you in?
Well, there is that thing that Henry James said about the turn of the screw, that if a situation is terrifying, it's doubly terrifying if there's a child involved, which I noticed that Bly Manor quoted in its first episode. But I think it's also what we were talking about how you reveal the world. If you have a naive or innocent point of view, you come to the world in a different way. You can, as a narrator, you can stage things in a different way. You can play with what the audience know at a given time, what they don't know. So that's a big part of it, I think. I think also it's because an awful lot of the stuff I write is about it's about parent-child relationships. I write about families a lot. I write about parents and children, both families that are supportive and loving and sort of functioning well, and families that are falling apart and are in crisis, because it's just a situation that endlessly fascinates me. So I think that's one reason why I have a lot of children in my writing. There's also like Elaine Belloc in the Lucifer books, who eventually becomes God. Yeah, I think it's a lot of stuff that having a child protagonist brings a lot of good things for a writer.
Do you ever have people say that your books are just young adult fiction or anything like that because of the narrators being so young?
Yeah, I think a lot of people said it about Girl with All the Gifts.
Yeah.
Talked about it as a YA book. I have no problems with that. I think there's some absolutely awesome work being done in YA. I'm not sure what YA is beyond a useful marketing tool. But yeah, it does seem to follow that if you have a teenage protagonist, people assume that it's YA. I guess if there is a core to YA, it's to do with people. It's to do with that transition into adulthood. It's to do with kind of like figuring out who you are as an adult. And there's certainly an element of that in Koli, and I think there was an element of that in Girl with All the Gifts as well. They are sort of it's the term Bildungsroman. They're stories about people sort of making that transition in their lives. But also usually in my stories, the fate of the world is sort of hanging in the balance somewhere along the way. So it's not just coming of age; it's coming of age and saving the day, kind of thing.
I think YA is a really strange category, like you said. It does seem like a marketing ploy, or um, it just seems strange to me because a lot of the books that I love and are drawn to have younger protagonists, and that's just because I like how the stories are told through their eyes, and everything is frightening when it has a child in it.
Yeah, I think we're fortunate in a way that we're sort of living in a post-genre age.
Yeah.
The age of the genre mashup. You can take elements from anywhere really and put them together, and the audience, you can trust the audience to be sophisticated enough to roll with it. So you can, I mean, in someone like me, you have a core situation where the protagonist is being taken over by a sort of alien extraneous force that is more powerful than her, more ruthless than her, and seems to get the job done better than her. And yeah, that could be like there's a psychological explanation for that. It could just be that she's suffering a psychotic break, or it could be a supernatural thing, or it could be to do with alternate universes and what Terry Pratchett calls the other trouser leg of time. And because you don't have to kind of like put your money where your mouth is up front, you don't have to define what genre space you're in up front. You can keep all of those possibilities alive, and the audience are not sure where and how the story is going to resolve, which I think is a really great freedom to have in storytelling.
I think that's really great too, because I remember reading like Ender's Game as a kid and not thinking that that was a child's story or a young adult story because it has a young protagonist. But it does feel like we've moved again past these arbitrary definitions or like lines.
Yeah.
Yeah. So most of your books are one-offs, or in the case of The Girl with All the Gifts, you then wrote The Boy on the Bridge. Was it difficult writing this trilogy? Because it's such a large story.
It was super easy, barely an inconvenience. It sort of unrolled by itself, really. As with the Girl with All the Gifts, there was a short story, and as with the Girl with All the Gifts, I was left at the end of the short story thinking, but there's more. There's got to be more here. So I started writing Book of Koli, and I think I was like 35 or 40,000 words in when I showed it to Anna, my editor, and said, do you think this is okay? Do you think it's got legs? And I did it that way. Normally I'll pitch a synopsis before I start writing. In this case, I didn't know if I could explain what it was going to be in a synopsis, because it depends so much on the voice and the viewpoint. So I thought the best thing to do would be to let the story explain itself. And I showed it to her, and I said, is it okay if I carry on with this? And she said, could it be a trilogy? And I said, funny you should mention that. I think it would work really well as a trilogy, or maybe even as a quadrilogy, tetralogy. Well, at one point I was thinking of having a fourth book, which would just be Spinner's book. And Anna persuaded me not to do that, but to put Spinner's story into the context of the whole thing. So in book 2, you'll see that there are Spinner sections as well as the Koli sections, which is why we have Saffron reading as well as Theo. So you have a split focus between Koli's journey and what's happening back in Mithermood in the world that he's left. And then in the third book, those stories to some extent coalesce again, although I won't say exactly how. So I always thought of it as a story that had a lot of stages to it, and therefore was better off being told in discrete chunks. We argued about titles. At one point, it was just going to be the first book of Koli, the second book of Koli, and the last book of Koli. But I like book Trials and Fall.
It's very poetic to me, the book, The Trials and the Fall.
We're going to go with labours. We're going to have the labours of Koli for book 2. It sounds more heroic, but I guess Trials is probably closer to the truth.
He's always going through trials.
Yeah. Most of them his own fault, in one way or another.
He is a very silly boy sometimes.
Yeah.
Are you working on anything new right now?
I am, yeah. I had an idea for another novel, which would be freestanding, and I'm about 10,000 words in. Again, without pitching, just sort of like putting it together and seeing what happens. The other stuff I'm doing is mostly screenwriting of one sort or another. I've been working for some years now on a movie adaptation of Fellside, the prison drama that I did, and that's a reasonably sort of advanced stage now. We have a screenplay, and we're starting to talk about actual production, although we don't have a budget yet. And I'm also working on a couple of other things with Colin and Cami, with Colin McCarthy and Camille Gassan, who were the director and lead producer on Girl with All the Gifts, who are just wonderful people to work with, incredibly inspiring, incredibly good collaborators. So I've got a couple of things pending there. I've got a project with the Henson Studio that's probably just about to go out to sort of active pitching. The one thing I'm not doing at the moment is any comics work. I finished Dollhouse Family in the spring, and I haven't got anything else sort of pending at the moment, which I'm sort of missing.
Do you have any social media to plug?
No, I'm on Twitter. People can find me on Twitter if they want to say hello. I'm not on Facebook so much anymore because Facebook seems to be the face of something evil and out of control.
I get into arguments if I talk to people on Facebook, so it's where I post pictures of my dogs.
Right. But yeah, that's all I do online. I occasionally tweet, and more often just answer people when they tweet at me. And the rest of the time I keep my head down.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me on the show, Dakota.
And thank you for listening. We'll see you next time. Have a good day.